Masquerada Songs and Shadows is one of my favorite games I've reviewed. I admired its Venetian-inspired world building and art and its different take on a hack-and-slash RPG-like combat, and I was enthralled with its strong voice acting cast, led by the none other Matt Mercer. Masquerada was made by Witching Hour Studio based out of Singapore. It was their second game. It was also their last game. Witching Hour closed up shop. We can only guess the reasons, but likely Masquerada didn't sell well enough to keep development afloat. This game is now an artifact of the passion, creativity, and hard work of a group of game developers. And even though the ending of Masquerada teased a sequel, we know now forever there will never be one. Masquerada is a piece of media, a thing. We can continue to interact with it, but its maker no longer exists. Like in Etruscan temple or Sumerian jar. This game is covered with the fingerprints of its developers, but now exists in this weird space of digital storefronts, untethered, adrift. Masquerada Songs and Shadows isn't a game about ruins, but it, as a game, is a type of ruin. Because as the title of this video suggests, video games are ruins. I've talked about before about how ruins are everywhere in video games, but when researching for that video, I often came across this discussion about video games as ruins themselves. The same reason why ruins are such a powerful narrative device in game worlds is linked to the ruinous nature that surrounds video games as art and objects and media. Masquerada is one such example of a game being an artifact, a kind of ruin of a company that no longer exists. Games of defunct studios are ruins, worlds suspended in time by artists we can no longer connect with. The art survives, but the artist is lost. So while Masquerada represents this kind of ruin, often the more prevalent discussion, and perhaps more obvious, surrounds video games as technological ruins. Like the GameCube. I recently made the long trip back home and finally cleaned out my mom's basement, literally, and retrieved my relic of the past, this delightful purple cube. It's since sat unplugged on my own shelf. My GameCube, like your Super Nintendo, like your friend's PS2, are all ruins of a technological past. In the days before Wi-Fi or HDMI cords, before solid-state drives and high definition, when wired controllers told you how far away from the TV you could sit, and who sat where on the couch so cords weren't tangled. The pursuit of the non-modern video game experience, CRT TVs and all, is under the broad umbrella of retro gaming. While to some retro gaming is just a way to experience older games, it is often caught up in broader ideas and trends across the video gaming space, like the pursuit for simpler gaming, without the always online trappings of modern games, or something more nostalgic, reliving and revisiting old worlds and characters we experienced when we were younger. We experience these games, we relive these memories or imagined ideas of the past through game consoles, objects with an aesthetic of a technological yesteryear. The GameCube just doesn't play something different, it looks different. When we boot up a console of the past, it's, in a way, the exploration of a ruin. Because ruins can be anything, as suggested in a paper by Rossetos, Metzitakos, Dimitrious, Panagiotakopoulos, and Marina, Christodoulou. But always, this ruin for some offers memories and nostalgia, while for someone else it is the dimension of the mystery, of the uncanny, something in which history is hidden behind the remnants and waiting to be discovered. Consoles work in the same way, whether they are remnants of a real but lost past, or a source of inspiration and mystery for someone who has never known the past. Both of these reasons are compelling, and perhaps why retro gaming has been packaged by corporate entities and sold back to you for a profit. Maybe that calls into question perhaps how much of a ruin it can really be, But retro gaming as an experience of a ruin is not so different than the tourist trap of any great archaeological marvel. Its commodification doesn't make it any less real. A GameCube or any console or video game technology of the recent past fills us with the same kind of wonderment and nostalgia and mystery as actual ruins do. I believe nostalgia to be one of the most dominant cultural and emotional forces throughout all aspects of video games. And if nostalgia is one of those important ideas when discussing ruins as a whole, we can see how game consoles too are a ruin by their relationship with a gamer's nostalgia. The article by Metzitakos and company discusses also the role of consoles in museums as aesthetic objects. Others too talk about consoles as artifacts. Professor Olli Sotamaa is noted for framing video games as composite media, and he suggests they can be studied as material artifacts, software or technological artifacts, and cultural artifacts. The GameCube can fit into any one of these. Maybe that's why I'm so reluctant to part with my purple boxy friend, even though it sits on my shelf unplugged. It sits as a ruin. And so too does Masquerada sit as a ruin in my Steam library. But yet both of these I can still turn back on. I can still explore them, but knowing I'm playing something from the past. The GameCube plays on the psychology of gamers, but Masquerada's untethered existence maybe less so. It's still a ruin, but it offers a different kind of emotional experience than booting up the classic purple squares that make their way around. But there's also a third kind of games as ruins. They're a window into the past.
Let's get Jeff in on this.
All right, that's
Go ahead,
completely
Jeff.
incorrect. Yeah, that's completely incorrect. First of all, you can actually play as a man or a woman in the game. Cooper, have you ever played Mass Effect?
No.
Right, well, I think the fact is you talked about, another thing that you mentioned is that how it's, has full graphic nudity. That's completely
Video games reflect the period and the culture in which they are produced. These aspects can be traced down in the visual design or story and language of the game, yet social aspects can also be portrayed in games that represent the culture in which they were created. Racism, sexism, class identities. Hence, video games can be treated as containers of cultural codes, symbols and ideas of their designers and audience. This is an excerpt from Benjamin Hanussek's article, Video Games is What Kind of Artifact? Establishing Effective Methodologies for a Solid Practice of Archaeogaming. And his idea is one I've already sort of skirted around in corners of my YouTube channel. Can you guess where? My take of Medal of Honor 2010 is that it is a riveting look at how we viewed the war in Afghanistan in the late 2000s. Like Hanussek discusses, it is a reflection of the period and the culture in which the game was produced. The game so boldly suggests the Afghan war won't end in American defeat, but fast forward to the present, it did. You can look at the evolution of any genre as a reflection of the changing dynamics of both developer and audience. Games as ruins show us the shifting societal views, like the Satanic Panic, or Columbine, or sex in video games. But even less dramatic, we can track the changing role of diversity in protagonists and storytelling over decades now, or the rise of accessibility and inclusive design. And even putting aside the social and the philosophical, you can just see how game design and technology has evolved. Compare Baldur's Gate to Baldur's Gate 3, and you are loaded with so much to unpack of the games alone, without even getting into the histories of tabletop role-playing games and the resurgence of Dungeons and Dragons and the rise of nerd culture in the 2010s and all of the social history that is going on in the background between these two games. Linkages and contexts become ways of viewing and seeing the world around us. Dare we ask, do we ever get Baldur's Gate 3 without Stranger Things? Even without such a hypothetical causal relationship, games become entwined with periods of not just our own lives, but the fabric of society. Can we think about Mortal Kombat without the controversies of violence in video games? Can we think about The Last of Us Part 2 without the hateful backlash? Can we think about Animal Crossing New Horizons without the COVID-19 pandemic? Games as ruins let us explore these connections. They become a part of history. If you can, I encourage you to go back and look at the gameplay of Baldur's Gate 1 to 2 to 3, or any long-running franchise that has multiple entries that span a decade, maybe. Pick your favorite, Final Fantasy, Call of Duty, and just ponder, for just a moment, about anything you're seeing in the evolution of these games and what that might mean. How these games are reflections of their context and exist inside history, not outside of it. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor welled those passions red which yet survived, stamped on those lifeless things, the hands that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." Percy Shelley's Ozymandias is more than just its famous line. Its brilliance comes from its story within a story within a story structure, to its travelogue nature, to its commentary on art and the artist. But for us, what it says about ruin that we care about, which is simply, even the greatest art of the King of Kings will fade into the desert. We, the reader, like the character who met this traveler, are left wondering what this colossal wreck looked like when it was more than just a ruin. But all we're left with is that imagining. How dissatisfying. When I was thinking about this game from the Witching Hour studio, I kept thinking of third-year English literature and this poem. Maybe because Masquerada only lives now on GOG, Steam, PS4, and Switch storefronts? But what will happen when the PS4 is like the PS2 and the Switch like the N64? When these digital storefronts on these consoles close? Will it continue to live and breathe in GOG and Steam? But what if the tech of PCs evolve and struggle to be backwards compatible? It'll be more and more inaccessible, until one day, it'll fade among the boundless and bare sands. And all of this I think of because I have played a game this year that is truly a ruin. Because of licensing reasons, you can't buy it anymore. You have to, pirate it. And pirating a ruin is just a weird thing to think about. It's the PC version of The Legend of Korra. It's a 6 out of 10 game. It's a solid, short experience with poor story and repetitive gameplay, but it makes you feel like the Avatar. Kidding, it's just okay, but it is kind of cool. It has some cool moments. It's a ruin. And so too, this year is Knockout City, a live service game about dodgeball that I really enjoyed. Its official servers went down in June of this year. I'm sure all of you have games that are no longer accessible, or multiplayer games that are now defunct. Battlefield Bad Company 2 is another one that broke my heart this year. The 3DS store went dark. Xbox 360's marketplace will be shutting down too. Games will just sink into the sand, and even if we do preserve them, they will be a ruin, a glimpse into the past. Shelley's work is so dissatisfying because we want to see the works of Ozymandias, but we'll never know. And so retro gaming is often framed as games preservation. And there's been a frantic uptick across the gaming space about the preservation of games, because we, as humans, don't want to be the unnamed sculptor with our creations lost to time. The question we now ask is, so what, John? So what? So what? Who cares about Masquerada and GameCubes and Baldur's Gate? And is this just an excuse for you to talk about Percy Shelley? Ruins, like I said in a video prior, show us the past, present, and future simultaneously. And games as ruins can show us such a wide range of ideas. From Masquerada being a kickstarted, funded game that still didn't win, to the rapid advancement in technology in games, to games reflecting and evolving with the context that surrounds them, and also being a window into the past, to games like Legend of Korra as things we can lose. And if that matters to us, and what we should do about it, because we're only going to lose more. Because when we think about games as ruins, we can ignore all the other controversies and debates surrounding video games. Whether they're art or not, whether they're all garbage and not like the golden years of whatever was popular during my youth, whether they're all political or not, or should be political but aren't, games like ruins or something to hold on to. They'll become a remnant of the past that'll fill us with either nostalgia, mystery, or inspiration. Whether we try to preserve games or let them be swallowed up by the desert, I don't know. But games, have a maker, who is a reflection of the time and society they lived in, an unnamed sculptor. And I think that counts for something, because etched onto each video game pedestal won't be an exaltation about the King of Kings, but a plea to the antique traveler, a plea to the gamer, a plea to you. Press play.